Welcome back, everybody. We're here for another episode of Comeback Stories, and we are back for round two with Mark Rose, human connection specialist and the founder of Create the Love. Thanks for coming back.
I mean, hopefully it's like a second time coming back. Like Jordan was pretty good the second
Back to
time,
back.
so I hope I can get better.
to back.
Well, it is the name of our podcast.
Yeah, I'm
Come
coming
back.
back again. I got a haircut since last time, so I'm feeling fresh.
Yes, sir.
I'm ready.
I love it, man. We're diving in. We're going right in. So I'm really curious on what is your definition of self-love today?
Yeah, that might. Who knows? That might evolve. I think that self-love is a collection of rituals and habits. I think it's the intention of how you go through your day. Self-love is something that, I think we often think is a destination. Like, oh, I finally got there. I love myself. And certainly we can maybe be reflective or mindful of a moment and be like, oh, yeah, I really feel a sense of admiration for myself. In the book, When Things Fall Apart, the author, Pema Chodron, talks about this principle of Maitri. And it's this idea of, and I'm sure you're familiar, is like becoming best friends with yourself. And so not just like a sense of admiration or like bubble baths and chocolate and all the things that we might think of as self-love. It's about actually developing a sense of reverence for yourself, like becoming your own best friend. And I think that goes beyond the, exercise practices, meditation, these tools that we use to access self-reflection and recognizing our patterns and the choices. But I do really believe also that if your choices are aligned with your values, then you will love yourself. If you don't love your choices, you won't love yourself. I think that's kind of like a full stop. And that's why even if you make a choice that's out of integrity, you discover what your integrity is. You discover what your values are. And we can get caught in the shame cycle of making poor choices. And I know we're all familiar with the shame cycle, that you make a choice and then it sort of doubles down if you don't have the tools to rescue yourself, like community, like meditation, commitments, stuff like that. So yeah.
The tools to rescue yourself, but I've come to understand that we must participate in our own rescue. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people were waiting for somebody else to rescue us or blaming. And I really feel like my life, and even in sobriety and post-sobriety, like really changed when I took ownership of my life.
Yeah.
And really was the one that participated in it, where I came and rescued myself.
Well, yeah, like who's going to come save us? I think that's the child desire, right? It can come from a good place. It's not to like shame that, but it's still a longing that is adolescent or sort of like an infant. And if we didn't get that as kids, of course, we're going to long for it. If we want to feel like we're enough, that someone will finally recognize our pain or love us enough or choose us or stay for us or whatever it is, as soon as you place any of those needs in someone else, they can't just love you. And that's what most relationships are like, caught in this wounding pattern where you don't just get to be together because you're participating in the cycles of wounding each other, And so, yeah, I think that recognition of entering into sobriety, I think interventions are powerful, obviously, because they work most of the time or often, maybe not most of the time, but in their reflection of saying, I love you so much that I just can't participate in the way you're continuing to be. I will no longer enable you. And so what's ultimately happening there is saying, I trust that this pain will get you to a place where you will save yourself. This may be me cutting you off, maybe whatever. I remember Russell Brand saying in his work on recovery that when you save people from the bottom, you scrape along it.
Whoa.
Right? Like you prevent them from bottoming out.
My mom comes to mind when you say that. My mom, God bless her, she just came to San Diego yesterday. I picked her up, but she's so blinded in love. She loves so hard that she oftentimes made my bottom so much deeper because she would come rescue me.
Mm-hmm.
And blinded by love, and there's probably some codependency and just really a lack of tools and a lack of boundaries, which now that I'm saying that out loud is maybe its own lack of self-love. Because as you were explaining the intervention process, I'm like, that's actually boundaries for the people
Yeah.
participating in the intervention, which still is rooted in their own self-love. Like saying,
Really it is.
yeah, I've never connected that until you explained it, but it's like, wow, there's so much there. That's all comes back to self-love in so many ways.
Well, think about when someone in an intervention says, I'll no longer participate in this. You're right. They're healing codependent patterns of enabling, which is often masked as I love so much, I love all out. Most of the codependent side of self abandonment and trying to rescue people, it keeps one person stuck in, no, I'm never enough for someone to just step up or stand up or choose me. And the other person who's maybe the addict or whatever they're suffering with, they have the belief, or we have the belief, that we're broken. So in order to maintain the relational structure the way it is, whether it's romantic, parent kid, brother sister, whatever it is, friends, it requires that one person still believes they're broken and the other one still believes that they need to fix them. And so they're usually patterns from childhood, right? Identities that we have. And so we source our worth or value or significance or maintain safety and connection. So that's why it's not to be villainized, but they're not healthy ways of relating. And so when someone gets sober, you often see the people who were trying to get them sober all the time with nothing to do anymore, right? They don't have a job. And then their addiction is trying to save. And it's like, imagine if they put all that energy into themselves. Well, I think often it's a way of distracting so they don't have to orient towards themselves.
I mean, I feel like there's so many times I've showed up in relationships, even though I was always manipulative or, really in it for my own agenda. I came in as the broken one, like masquerading behind the manipulation. And, it's really, and that makes sense why you say self-love is rituals and habits, because my natural inclination is not to love myself, because I have a very long, I always think of SpongeBob. I don't know if a lot of people watch SpongeBob, but there's one where he has a scroll and the paper runs along the ground, and it's like that's how the list of things where my choices didn't align with the best version of myself. Like, you don't like your choices, you're not going to love yourself. So I have so much experience in not liking my choices that I need repetition and practice and habits to be in place for me to not operate at a deficit there. For me to even be started on this path of self-love. So it's like, I hear that, and just circling back to the definition that you had in the beginning, like, it makes so much sense just for my story alone.
Yeah, me too. This identification, I remember my friend saying that beliefs are just thoughts that you think over and over again that become your own. Like, someone else says something to you about you, or you have an experience where it's not explicitly said, but let's say your mom leaves or your dad leaves. I'm not worthy of someone staying for. So the thought that you think over and over again becomes a belief you hold about yourself. And it's intentional, important work to be able to shift beliefs. I mean, at the core of everything is changing what you believe about yourself. And the fastest way to change a belief is to just do its opposite. But to do it in one moment, like, last time we spoke, I talked about laying a boundary, how a boundary creates self-worth. And it requires self-worth. And the same thing is true when you're changing a belief. You might believe that you're not worthy of being loved. But for the first time, you stop pursuing someone who's unavailable. And you're like, oh my God, I never thought I could do this. And it's kind of an addictive process that you have to break. Like, if you're someone who lives in the world of booty calls, and all of a sudden you just stop making booty calls, it's like there's a drug and an arousal that you're used to using as a way of regulating that you stop pursuing. And so you're in this moment where you're like, I've never had to sit with this. But you start to cultivate a different belief. I'm worthy of being shown up for because I'm showing up, and it's always sourced from self. As much as it's like we wish someone would save us, it's always us. Even relationship stuff, like people come to me about breakups. That's usually what people find my work through, or struggles in relationship. 100% of the time, it always comes back to them. They come to try to get someone back or heal from something. But and as you guys both know, you ultimately always end up meeting yourself or deepening your relationship with yourself.
Your definition with self-love being habits and rituals, I think so much of self-love that doesn't get talked about enough is accountability. But but it's really staying accountable to those habits and rituals and keeping the promises you make to yourself. When you say
Yeah.
you're going to do something in the morning, that you follow through on it, because when you don't, you're not going to feel great about yourself. And when you're not feeling great about yourself, we tend to either project it outward, stay small. But it is that belief system that I think all of our belief systems at some point need to be uprooted because they're broken and
Yeah.
they're rooted in our conditioning from our younger years, which comes back to just the power of awareness. But I think that's why I love you so much. And some of our belief system, I believe Brad Lee was sitting in here and he said, what do you guys think can change a belief system? And he said, new information.
Mm.
So when you get new information, and really it's the way that you articulate things specifically, and it's not just me. I have a big circle of friends that are like, you're also your number one fans, and we'll also often talk about it a lot, but it's just the way that you're able to provide information. I know it's helped me so much in the relationship I have with myself, but also just in relationship in general.
Yeah. First off, thank you so much
Yeah.
for having a fan club around. That feels good
Yeah.
to know just that words can impact. I think one of the things that I often hear is just like when someone can put into words something that you are emoting or you're feeling, but you've just never been able to organize in a way. And that's usually what I do, is just listen to other people or learn things through myself and then sort of write them out or think them out kind of out loud, often in my solo episodes. The thing that you said that I really love, well, new information. I think of that quote from Tony Robbins that we change for two reasons. One, we learn so much we have to, or it hurts so much we have to. And I think knowledge that we learn so much we have to actually creates pain, because we now know something that we're not integrating yet. And I think the other part, which you said, is that like that humility, that like space of being willing, because so much, if I was receiving feedback when I was younger from a partner, and she said like, hey, you're not showing up, or I feel like you take me for granted, I would have gotten defensive about that. I would have been so like, I'm not enough. Like, it's just more evidence that she's giving to the thing that I'm trying to hide anyways, like the like stoicism and the chivalry and the humor and the smiling, like all this protective mechanism. And when I would be hit with something that was real, that was true, I couldn't hold it. And I think what happens when we start to build self-love and self-worth is that receiving feedback isn't something we're afraid of holding anymore, because hearing I'm not showing up, it doesn't mean that I'm not a good person. It just means that there's active information that's saying how I could be a better person or a better partner. Oh my God, it took me so long to actually see a partner's feedback as evolution or an opportunity for growth. I mean, I apologize to all my girlfriends when I was in my teens and 20s, because I certainly did not have capacity.
Yeah,
for that.
not open to receiving it. And I believe that if a partner or anybody in relationship is feeling a certain way, they're 100% right.
Yeah. they are.
So it's us. So it's on us to listen, to be able to listen, and for a man, me personally, to humble myself. Initially, when I get feedback, that first couple seconds, it's like, oof, any kind of feedback
Yeah, me too.
doesn't feel good for a couple seconds. And then it's just like open back up and receiving it, because ultimately, especially if it's in any type of relationship, that if they consciously know how to express whatever isn't being met, whatever need isn't being met, there's so much growth there.
So much. And, I never used to see my partner or feedback from, like, my mom gave me feedback recently that I was really grateful for. And I never used to see feedback as that. Like, you know that saying, you can't see the forest when you're in the trees? That's so true relationally. Like, you don't know where your limitations are. You don't, even when you're in it, you don't know that you're hitting your, you often think it's their limitation, not your own, which is, again, the brilliance of the way that we see things, so that we don't have to have our own self-worth impacted. But when you can actually hold what I believe is healthy shame, which is the recognition that you can be better, then you let it, Francis Weller, who I love as a teacher, he would say, you let it cook you. And I think about that a lot, of like, you sit in the actual pain of it and you let it cook you so that you can ripen, you can become better, you can grow, you can change. And if you do that, you're going to love yourself.
So beautiful.
That's where I feel like we talk about meditation so much. I feel like it shows up in that way now for me as I'm trying to grow as far as in a emotional intelligence space where it's meditation creating that space. Because when that feedback is presented to itself, the very first inclination of something that is trying me or like, is calling something out in me, like I have to be present in that moment to be able to make the choice to not pounce on it like a wolf. You know what I'm saying?
Totally, totally.
Just the first, because like if somebody puts a compliment out there, like you're worthy of love, like you're gonna be a great husband, you're gonna be a great father, like the first inclination of that, I'm not pouncing on that. I'm pouncing on like the negative,
Right.
What's perceived as critical. So I feel like we have to develop that habit, that ritual, that honestly like that reflex, like that subconscious reaction to where it's like when it's coming at me, it's not trying me, but I have to make that choice in the moment and realize that it's my choice to make, and I have power in that because a lot of times before I didn't realize I had the power. I was just kind of at the mercy of whoever was giving feedback.
Yeah, that reactivity, I think responsibility, the ability to respond, right? That space that you're talking about. Meditation was so powerful and continues to be powerful for me as a tool because what I've felt it's done is turned that like millisecond or 1 second, it feels like 3 seconds. It feels like there's actually a choice. Before it was like, I was like pounce on that thing. Make sure I don't have to deal with that or feel that or negate their feelings, gaslight them, whatever I need to do to preserve my very delicate feeling of self-worth. I'm curious too, what has broadened your guys' ability to do that. For me, cold plunging, I have a cold plunge and that's just broadened it even more because I can sit in the cold or cold shower and be like, my body's saying you're going to die. And I can consciously explore and say, I'm safe. And so it allows me to feel my body's desire to run or react, but actually stay present to the body and not let it run me out of the experience that's actually expanding me.
I did a really powerful intentional listening exercise with my coach a few years back, and it's the same exercise I now pass along to my coaching clients. But what gets in the way of intentional listening, the three main components are typically judgment, distractions, and defenses. So when you hear that pouncing, like that's what I want to do initially is defend. But the moment that I'm defending, I can't actually listen to what they're saying.
Yeah.
So to be able to drop the defenses, it's been a practice. It'll always be a practice.
Same.
But I think, meditation, cold plunging, these things that kind of yoga. So in yoga, I always talk about in the practice in postures to be able to meet our edge and soften. To get to the edge in yoga, you do not push past your edge. We do that plenty of other times in our practice, in our daily life, but yoga is about find your edge and soften to be able to get to your edge and find peace there. It's a practice. That's what yoga offers us. This valuable tool that we can take off of our mat so that when we get pushed to our edge, we've been in the practice. We've been there. We know how to handle it. We don't have to manage it with our mind. We can just work through it with our breath because our breath can get us through anything. But I think the yoga and those poses to explore our edge and not go ego and push past or not grip and grasp and hold on and cling on when we're at our edge, but just to be able to,
in yoga. Oof.
Just to be able to, it's like I always give the analogy of grippy toes. So when your toes are clinging into the mat, that is an illusion of control. It's our perception of control. So we're gripping, grasping, but it's probably because our back leg is like not doing something right. But yoga really, I think, is the most valuable thing that's allowed me to find my edge and soften so that I don't take it out on anybody else, that I can respond versus react.
Yeah, I feel that with yoga.
Yeah, I feel like anytime you put your body in an uncomfortable position, I feel like even just working out, like a lot of people want to be swole and like jacked and like look a certain way and be perceived a certain way. But for me, I feel like a perspective on working out to where it's like you get pushed to that edge and you have a choice to make, whether it's to go with the comfortable choice of like, maybe easing off of it or, not going past that line, that place of comfort and going beyond that. I feel like that is a way in the practice, if I'm present to that and realizing that in the moment, it's like, I continuously put myself in this difficult position to gain the repetition in choosing the choice that I want to choose, because in this moment of discomfort, it's very easy for me to choose the comfortable reaction, the comfortable feeling. And I feel like that can translate and transcend just that physical workout environment into my emotions, into the way that I think, because I'm taking that experience with me wherever I go. And if I have repetition and experience, like you said, in self-love, like that choice I made in that arena, how you do something is how you do everything, essentially. So I feel like with the right perspective, working out can train you for that.
Yeah, I think when we try to change beliefs, I think the shifting of beliefs relationally actually takes longer. And what I mean by that is, from the first reflection of a pattern or something that you need to implement relationally, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of you also have to have the moment available, right? And so even to lay a boundary, you have to like have the opportunity to lay one. And with exercise and food, because so many of our dysfunctional patterns exist in our food, and that's both because food is not necessarily, it's so processed. There's so many things to it. But what I mean is that if I start to choose food differently, more intentionally, quit sugar, quit caffeine, whatever it is that I'm choosing, I immediately will feel better. If I start exercising, I'll immediately feel better. So I think any psychological shift, like any desire to shift something relationally, actually pays to also start meditation, exercise, and just eat differently. And you might not want to do everything all at once. I know some people are like the all or nothing. But what happens is you immediately get a shift from exercise. And going to the edge exercise-wise, like I think one of the most powerful things about hiking, for example, or doing a hard kettlebell exercise, is that when you complete a trail hiking, you're one of 0.0001% of the population that has ever done that hike. And that's something to be proud of. And I think that just those little shifts are so monumental. And I think you just get direct feedback, so beliefs change much quicker.
I love this conversation
Yeah.
so much. I was listening to one of your podcasts a few weeks ago, and you were talking about betrayal, and I started to wonder why people betray themselves. If I think about in my last relationship, why I did, and I'm understanding a little bit of that, but I think, is there some common themes on why people betray themselves or abandon the authentic version of themselves when it comes to relationships, romantic relationships?
Well, I think last episode we talked about the value that we place in relationship, right? In being in a relationship. And that's part of it, but also, when people self-betray or self-abandon or don't prioritize themselves in order to maintain connection. So it's a security-based thing. It's a safety-based thing. It's not functional. It's not actually contributing to a healthy relationship, because ultimately what you're doing is saying, I don't trust you, whoever you're in a relationship with, that you can actually hold all of me, that you can actually honor my needs. And then the relationship becomes a place that doesn't honor your needs, and often will be the victim of that. Well, there was no space for me. And that can be true, right? So I'm not minimizing when maybe you have a manipulative person on the other side of that. But every relationship that we're in, we are agreeing to be in. And that's not negating the experience of victimization, but to say, what are we going to do with the information we get? So I might be, I want to be really cognizant of, where am I self-abandoning? Where do I collapse or put other people's needs ahead of mine? When I talk to people about where they self-abandon or whatever it might be in relationship, you can just ask them, like, how old do you feel in that moment? And often it's really young. I definitely self-abandoned a lot in a relationship. And it was because I didn't want to appear needy. I didn't want to appear like a controlling guy. Because I grew up in the 90s, and a lot of and this is true of today, the conversation about men is, men are bad, men are rapists, toxic masculinity. And so I didn't want to identify with I didn't want anything to do with that. And so I often had this sort of righteous energy of like, I'll be nicer than your ex-boyfriend or nicer than your current boyfriend, And thinking that there was really value in that. But there wasn't. The women, at the end of the day, wouldn't respect me because unconsciously and sometimes consciously, they're like, will you forego your own integrity for me? Will you fold your purpose for me? Will you do something that's not in alignment with your values? Will you put up with something? And this could be in any relationship, but will you put up with something that's not kind to you for me? And when we're in people pleasing or enabling or accommodating and self abandoning, we often will. But there's this line in Robert Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, where he says, if you don't stand up to her, she won't believe you'll stand up for her. And that to me, I remember when I read it, I was like, oh shit. Like I can see that I wouldn't be respected because when push comes to shove, I couldn't be trusted. Because ultimately the saying in that book is nice guys are anything but nice, because ultimately the kindness is contrived. It's trying to manipulate or meet a need, and wanting to appear as good. But if you want to be real in relationship, you can't be concerned about appearing as good. Sure, you should be generous, kind, respectful, all those things, absolutely. But you're not, if you want to be real in relationship and have real authentic connections, you can't try to protect people from the feelings of being upset with you or hurt. You want to obviously not go out intentionally to hurt people, but you want to tell the truth. And grown-up adult relationships are not about getting along all the time. That's bullshit. No one does. They're about repairing. They're about meeting each other's needs, but also not collapsing. No one wants that. I think we ultimately think we do, or think someone does, but it never leads anywhere good. I hope that makes sense.
No, it definitely does, and it's like I see so much like examples of emotional balance in that. I heard this pastor I listened to say one time. He said like, we as people, we have legitimate needs that we respond to with illegitimate responses.
That's good.
Like the need to feel secured or to feel loved is a legitimate need. Like it's something that we all desire, but the ways that we go about doing that is there balance in that. And by betraying ourselves, abandoning ourselves, all times that I've done that, it's like, yeah, I want that need, I want to feel it, but it's like, where am I going to have that need fulfilled? And if I'm going outside of me, that's a problem. That's not the response that's going to get me the result I want. The intention is there, but the actions don't necessarily match.
Well, and then the relationships are designed around pretending, and then like we don't even get to be in authentic connections. That's our part. And then we're like, no one ever sees me, like people they don't hear me. And it's like, well, you're not being you, And I remember when I recognized that of like, wow, how can you ever feel fully loved if you're not fully present in the relationship? You're too busy image managing, which doesn't work.
That was my abandonment. I mean, that was it right there. Oof. What do you think? I'm guessing most people reach out to you when they're in some pain based on the relationship. What do you think the purpose of pain is? And I want you to talk about, there's something I've always asked myself that I've heard from you. It's like, what is this pain asking of me?
Well, I think pain can serve us, right? It's information. I think like all emotions, it's information. It's telling us. When you think about emotional pain, the challenge is that society, I'd say pharma industry, like all these places have said that if you're depressed, if you're sad, if you're grieving, there's something wrong with you. Like there's a problem, and you need a pill to fix that. And I'm not saying that that's not appropriate sometimes. But what it's done is, because it's not explained, is that it's made us believe that feelings are either bad or good. And if I'm experiencing what we code as bad feelings, then there's something wrong with me and I need to fix what's wrong with me. But imagine if, much like we were talking about before, imagine if we started to orient around the thought, I'm feeling these things, instead of what's wrong with me, which then feeds the narrative I'm not enough, is what's right with me. Like what's wise about me that I feel these things. Because imagine if, and usually that comes from our feelings being negated or it not being safe to express or process feelings as kids. And so we automatically believe especially if our family, let's say, didn't have space for anger or didn't have space for grief, or didn't have space for anything but happiness or positive thoughts, then we're going to not have access to any of these feelings. They're present, but we're not safe to express them, because if we express them, we might not, we might get scorned, we might get bullied in school. There could be so many things. But the pain emotionally, when I think about it physically, like if you touch a stove, you burn your hand, you're not going to do that again. If you were to hurt your hand, you would stop doing the thing. But if your heart's hurting and you think there's something wrong with me that I'm hurting, and maybe you're in a relationship dynamic that you're participating in, and maybe it's your own behaviors, could be addictions, right? That is informing you that it doesn't feel good. But if there's an inherent belief something's wrong with you, and that's why you feel that way, as opposed to that information is actually trying to get you to do something differently. Like if you're depressed or anxious in a relationship, that's not a sign there's something wrong with you. That's a sign that there's just something not being expressed, something not being listened to. Because if we were to then use it as information that our environment needs to shift, or our choices need to shift, or both, then we'd actually change our state. So pain to me is transformative. I mean, I think truthfully, till we recognize it, we usually change when we have to. It's usually like the rock bottom. And we know rock bottoms from the perspective of like drugs or alcohol, but we can have relational rock bottoms. And I think that can be breakups, that can be divorces, that could be just simply disruptions. It could be conflict that's repeated over and over again. It could be infidelity. It could be lying. There's so many different ways, again, that we have access to discover where we're out of alignment, we're out of integrity, where we need to grow, where we need to change. And yeah, most of us go on the search for personal growth or relational growth or therapy or whatever because of pain. And, a lot of couples turn towards therapy when it's too late. By the time someone says, hey, I'm not feeling connected, or I'd like to go to therapy, or I'd like to read this book, if that's not enacted upon, it's about 2 years till they leave. And the challenging part, and depending on which research you look at, but the research demonstrates that women leave more than men. And women tend to turn towards their romantic partner for support and things like that less than men do. So when a relationship ends, men lose their emotional support system generally. And they're more likely to get into another relationship quickly. I think, for a number of reasons. One, we don't really have men's groups or support groups. We don't tend to talk about emotional things. And, it's probably safer to talk with our partner. It feels safer. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question.
Oh, it was great. I can't remember if we brought this up on the last conversation last week, because I think I blacked out from the depth and and inspiration that was came about last week. But I think there's a relationship to pain. And I was sharing with someone the story around my knee and all the physical pain and the trauma and the surgeries, and how sometimes in class I will grab my knee and kiss it, like give it some love.
I wish I could. I don't even know if I could get there. But.
And my friend was like, instead of like babying it, thank the pain. Like thank the pain. The pain is why I'm sitting here right now. The physical pain I had in my knee that had these surgeries that led me to the addiction and all of that.
Right.
Thank the pain. Like change that around. You can give it some love, but just thank the actual pain because of what it's done for your life. And
that's beautiful.
Yeah, to change that perspective shift, which I am so grateful for that. But I was babying and nursing, and I've protected my knee for years. I mean, favoring my right leg, but to really turn that around and go right to the pain and just say thank you. Because I do believe that pain can teach us more than we'll ever learn from anybody else about ourselves. There's so much there.
Yeah, the hard times will always teach you so much. I think of the most transformative moments in my life were all the most painful. And I think that's available to all of us. It's if we're willing to turn towards it, it is the path to liberation. for everybody involved. And I think it's Glennon Doyle who says that there's no such thing as one-way liberation. Like if you're freed, the other person is. They just might not know it yet. And that's, I think, important to remember. I had a guy I met at a cafe who followed my work, and he said something so profound to me. He was serving us, and he said to me, I left my relationship, and I said to her, or I had the recognition that the relationship wasn't for me anymore. And he's like, I said to her, and I'm not sure that she understood it yet. It was pretty fresh when he was talking to me. He said, but if it wasn't for me, it wasn't for her. And I thought, isn't that so fascinating? Like, one of the qualifiers for us relationally is that if someone doesn't want to be with you, they're not the one. Like, first off, I don't believe there's just one, because that, again, just creates more scarcity and not really as much free choice. But I thought that was so beautiful, of like just the recognition, like, of course. And she might not recognize that yet because she wants it to be with him, but it can't possibly be with him because he doesn't want to be with her. It's so simple, but if someone had said that to me when I was like 19 and experiencing betrayal, I'd have been like still pining over it, That's the beauty of maybe age, that you get to learn, right?
Yeah. I want to change the topic a little bit. I want to ask you, what was the process like of fully embracing the journey to be in the work that you're in now? Because I don't feel like a lot of people would be like, yeah, I'm going to be on social media and help people with their relationships. A lot of people might be like, how are you going to do that? Like, why would you do that? Like, they would, just the world we live in, they'd push you to a more conventional route, something that has proven results, that will get you a salary, that'll get you these things. Like, what were some of the obstacles and anxieties that you faced in like fully embracing this work and really chasing after it?
Oh man, there were a lot of anxieties, especially because I was living the life I'd been taught to live. I talked on the last one about I was 27, got engagement, and I was right on target. I was checking all the boxes, and I was a rep. I was a pharmaceutical rep. I was making reasonable money, and I could be a highly qualified provider. And my friend John Morrow, who's an artist, says, if you want to find what you love, find what breaks your heart. And I felt this call. I always loved human behavior. I always loved understanding relationships. But it was more from a space of manipulation, how to get someone to buy something. But when I wanted to dive deep into understanding relationships for myself, which is really where it was born from, I wanted to understand, why do some relationships end and others not? Why do some people stay together in love and others not? Why do we cast so much judgment when relationships end? And in the journey of studying all that, I just felt like at the time, this would have been 14, 15 years ago, I was thinking, like, I felt like no one was telling the truth about relationships. Like I didn't feel like there was anyone teaching that shared and gave permission for things to end. And that sounds so weird to think, but I just wanted someone to say, like, you're still a good person even though you ended a relationship. Like, you're actually, it was weird to be feeling like I was more connected to myself, but feeling more judged. And, which I think I mentioned last time, but when I started to write about them, it was really from the place of, I want to share what I'm learning about my own stuff. And so it was really taught, and still is taught, from the place of, here's what I've learned academically, here's what I'm learning from conversations, here's what I'm learning from other teachers, here how that applies to me. There was a lot of anxiety about leaving certainty and a job and an identity and then leaping into, I remember people saying to me, like, just leap and the universe will catch you. And I was like, like, keep smoking weed, buddy. Like that, that sounds so abstract. But now I realize that there is something to that. There's something to trusting a purpose that's trying to be born from you, usually through your pain. And I think, there's that saying, turn your mess into your message. And I ultimately believe that we become the teachers we needed. And then really our work is about just teaching younger versions of ourselves, and that's really how I've thought about my own. So how did I overcome it? just by doing it, like recognizing, there's a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways. And I remember that being sort of like a Bible for me for a while of like fear's along for the ride, and it's got useful, it's got some purpose. But I was breaking free of paradigms of who I thought I needed to be relationally as a man. All these identities were crumbling, and just another one of how you make money, what's a reasonable job. You start to realize that it's all just constructs and, often bullshit. Like the limitations that we're taught. Like, you can't do this, you can't get this kind. I remember being a kid, I'm not sure if you guys learned this, but a lot of what I learned was like, get a job, become a doctor or an accountant, or I don't know, what's another one, an engineer. I was like, man, all of them work so hard and they got to go to school for so long. I don't even like any of those things, but so much status is associated with those jobs. And, I think a lot of people still identify, like, if you're not one of those things, then your parents might not be proud of you. I know culturally there's different status jobs, So yeah, it's been a continuous unfolding.
Your writing is so special, and one of my favorite episodes is one of your solo episodes. I believe it's Let Yourself Be Loved. And in that episode, I'm not sure, is it your blog or I don't know the context of where you wrote it, but maybe I'll just let you take this piece. Because I asked you to bring it in and read it. And you're
I was
so
like,
kind to
what was
actually
it?
do that.
I couldn't remember it. It was a post. And it was a post about, I often just will reflect on having worked with someone or just a new awareness that I have about myself. So much of the conversation we have about commitment. And we often will say, especially to men, you're just afraid of commitment. And there's something inherent that, because I was told that a lot, you're just afraid of commitment, as opposed to like, what was we were talking about pain. Like, what was the wisdom in my anxiety? What was the wisdom in my reluctance? There was so much, but I didn't have a guide or someone to be able to extract that from me or say like, hey, there's brilliance in this. Let's explore it. And so I had someone tell me that they were told they're afraid of commitment, and I started to really reflect on it, and then this is what I wrote from it. You're not afraid of commitment. You're afraid of being hurt by someone you're committed to. It's not that you don't believe you're worthy of an amazing partner. It's that you don't trust love, and in turn, you don't trust yourself, you don't trust that you'll know how to hold it, that you'll hold on to yourself when you meet it, stand up for yourself to protect it, or walk away when the love is no longer present. The solution to this is that you have to learn how to be committed to yourself and your truth above everything else. You have to learn how to have boundaries around your heart, your desires, your values. You have to become a warrior who has your own back always, in all ways. When we know that we won't sell ourselves out in the face of anything, all of a sudden everything becomes possible. You must love yourself unconditionally, above all else, to be able to share love with another. It is this trust in yourself that will allow you to trust love, because ultimately love is who you are, not what you seek. When I read that, I remember someone saying to me that people don't believe they're unworthy of love. Because that was sort of the core belief that I thought everyone, like at the core of all our patterns, is really like, I'm not worthy of being understood, protected, safe, loved. But I thought, well, at the core of that is still a belief that I'm not worthy of being listened to, or I'm not worthy. So just I'm not worthy. And I remember this person said to me, no, it's a lack of trust. It's a lack of trust in love. Innately, we all have deeper down a belief that we're worthy, that it's possible, that we should be treated with respect, reverence, all that kind of stuff. But it's that we don't trust that when we're in connection, we're going to experience that. And that now I remember reading that it was really about, I had this big shift of like, oh, it's not that I believe I'm unworthy. It's that I don't trust love because of my experiences with it.
At the root of that is I don't trust. I don't trust myself.
Yeah, like I don't trust myself. I don't trust that I'll stand up to someone who is breaching that trust or betraying me. But yeah, it's really a lack of self-trust.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need a picture of that before you leave this room.
I got you. I got you.
Can you talk a little bit about just the process of processing grief? Again, maybe when it comes to relationships. It's just so interesting. And I think I maybe shared this on the last podcast, but as I navigated and walked through my transition of ending a cycle and a breakup, as I've attracted maybe coaching clients that are similar in a similar situation
Yeah.
and stuck, but just how that works is wild. But maybe how people can be more present and actually slow down through the process of change and grief instead of, like you said earlier, running from and turn towards instead.
Yeah, it's crazy how synchronicity brings together someone who's going through what you've just gone through or something similar. You know, I'm sure that you both have experienced too in the journey of sobriety. Like, it just brings people who are struggling with similar, especially as you bring new awarenesses. Yeah, you know, with grief, when Kylie and I broke up, we had been together around 5 years, I think, and then broke up for almost a year, and then got back together. And when we broke up, the relationship was over. Like, it was done. I was moving on, and she was moving on. And that was in September 2019. And I remember just feeling so much grief, like grief that it was the first time I'd ever been through a breakup sober, which those are different. You know, like, I'd been protected by, you know, the bottom of a pint glass from, I guess, finding the bottom. That grief that sort of demands you to feel. And I had the recognition and the realization that a lot of grief is old grief. Like, I could tell that what I was excavating was not just about her. It was about all the times I hadn't sat with sadness. And it brought me back to like 17 and 19 when I told the story last time about going out on Halloween and trying to have a one-night stand. But I totally bypassed that grief. And, you know, I think a lot of the times we try to save people from feelings we don't know the value of.
Whoa.
You know, like when someone's going through grief or is experiencing anger or whatever it is, we often try to rescue them from it. But when someone's going through a breakup and grieving, I don't do that at all. I remind them that I'm here, or if they need someone, how can I help? What do you need from me? But I know the value of grief. I don't know that there's a more powerful, transformative emotion. I think anger shifts us. Like, it's one of those that even accompanies grief a lot of the time. But grief is one of those things that demands to be felt. You know, it roots you. It like makes it, think about depression often, right? It like makes you immobile. But the key to moving through it is continuing to ask it questions, continuing to process it, often with other people. You know, and when someone's going through a breakup, often they'll say, like, how do I get over my ex? Or you know, how do I move forward? And I think sometimes grief, in order to process it, isn't about moving forward. It's actually about staying still. And then it's about doing the things that holding on is holding you back from, you know, in the context of relationship. Like, oh, I'm not doing that thing now because they hurt me so much. It's like, oh, yeah, you get to blame them and resent them for the fact that you haven't expanded or grown or done something. It's a way that we think we're getting back at them, which, meanwhile, they're having a pina colada and on vacation in Cancun, not thinking about it. And here we are thinking that they are, or that our pain and suffering will somehow make it back to them. Maybe if we put up a Taylor Swift or Adele quote, they'll recognize, you know, how much we're suffering. And I say that having done that once. So I put up a Taylor Swift quote when I was going through a breakup years ago, and my friend just texted me and said, delete it. It's too far. We need to talk. I was like, yeah, okay.
It's like drinking poison and thinking they're going to die. That's
Yeah.
the quote.
Right. Yeah.
That's the resentment.
Yeah. Ugh.
Your way with words are just amazing. I feel like, yeah, you articulate things that I have in my heart, but can't, from a relationship standpoint, always say, and it's always just just brings a lot of gratitude to having you sit here in the flesh with us today and break this down.
Man, it's an honor to be able to sit with you both and chat with you about, all these things that I don't think we often get to chat about as men. Like how many dude circles right now are talking about grief?
Right.
Listening to Adele. Probably not many.
Yeah. And just, I'm thinking, I'm seeing the sign of comeback stories flashing behind us, right? And I'm like, a lot of, when people think of a comeback story, it's like what people are coming back from. Like where am I going from there? But it's like this conversation is reminding me of like, this is twofold almost. It's like, what do we need to come back to? Like what do that self-love, that honoring ourselves, that integrity within ourselves, that respect for ourselves. And it's just like that overcomes me now, especially just with you sitting here. Like that thought has never overcame me. I was not sitting on that. That was something that came to me just by you being in the room and saying what you say and sharing the perspectives that you have. That it's a reminder for me of what I need to come back to, because there are times where I'm in those moments and I don't trust that love. You know what I'm saying? So thank you. I had to say thank you.
Yeah, it's almost like coming back to love.
Yeah.
Create the love. Come back home to the heart. Where I think we will run, we'll turn, we'll close, but this is all about finding the practices, the information that returns us back to the essence of what we are, which is love. And if we know we are love, then we know we are loved and lovable. But I think I need to be reminded, and it's great to have platforms like this. One topic I want you to touch on before we wrap up is this whole idea of sacredness and making things sacred. I hear it in your stories and in closing ceremonies that you've done in breakups and closing ceremonies of leaving houses. But just what's the importance of that for you, and how have you seen that transform your life just from just the intentionality of being sacred in the things that you do?
I think I had an aversion towards like God or sacred because I was raised Catholic, and I really felt like in the experience of being raised and going to Catholic school, there seemed to be an actual lack of presence of God and a lack of presence of unconditional love and a lack of presence of sacredness in those circles. So I had a hard time hearing the word God or sacred and it not being associated with like sacrament or altar or religion. But then I realized that by decoupling those things, I was taking the power back, and it was really only through the birth of, or through the relationship with Kylie that, she's been the perfect partner to come back home or come back to that. And when we broke up, there was so much love present. Like we had done everything to try to make it work. And so really we looked at it like we've done the psychotherapy work together. We've done all the stuff. And the only thing that's left is we need to depart. And that was hard to embrace because you're again going against all these stories and thoughts about what it means to stay together. And, we both teach relationships. So what does it mean about us that this relationship is not lasting? I got asked that a lot when we broke up. And I said, well, the premise of my work has never been about that. It's always been about the truth and telling the truth at the cost even of the relationship. And I mean, it was one of the most powerful, potent, transformative experiences I've ever had because there was so much love present in that ending that it deepened me and her on such another level. Like it made me realize that if you can do that, then you can love somebody. Because when it ends, the love isn't dependent on the staying together. It's dependent on how we work together and who we are together. And when the relationship ended, I remember saying to her, hey, what do you think about doing a closing ceremony? She's like, that sounds great. Because we had, just by logistics and timing, the last conversation we had about completely closing it was via FaceTime. And it was just, she had gone off to Europe and, it was just timing. And so we hadn't seen each other in person and we wanted to come together in person to really be honor, do it with honor and just have a conversation. And she said, yeah, let's do it. So I'm like, well, I don't even know what that is. So I Google closing ceremony relationship, and there's other crazy people who have done this. And so I sent her some ideas of, based on what I read, just like put together different versions and thoughts about it. And I remember pulling up to the house and thinking to myself, like, do I really want to do this? Like, I had that feeling of like, not really up for this. Like, this sounds like hell. And I remember asking myself, do I not want to do it because I just genuinely don't want to do it? Or do I not want to do it because it's going to require more of me than I know exists? Like, it's going to expand me. It's going to demand something of me that I don't even know how to access. And the answer was number 2. So I was like, shit. So I went in the house. We lit a fire, and we had a playlist for it of music that was important to us. And, all that stuff is so painful, but it's also so important. And then there were 3 questions that we explored together. The first one was, what were our favorite memories? What did we, I want to remember them all correctly, but what were our favorite memories? I want to say the second one was like, what did we learn, or what did we most appreciate about the other person? Our favorite memories that might have been number 2, because I remember going to the second one and it fucking destroying me. Like, that was hard. I was like sobbing the majority of the time. And the third one was, what do we hope for the other person? That one was hard to access. And we talked about that. Just like, I know what I hope for you, but it's really hard to access that fully right now because I was in such grief. And, in a longer version of our story, there was a metaphor of a burning house, which if anyone wants to learn about that, we have a couple episodes called Let It Burn Part 1 and 2. And so we actually burnt a wooden house that was a tree house, like a little bird house. And that was just really important from a sort of what it symbolized. And I mean, I left the house that day totally different. I had never ended a relationship with such grace and intention. And, I remember interviewing this woman on my podcast named Yoda, which is an apropos name for what she shared. But she said that she had heard once that you should leave a relationship as you leave a house, that you prepare it for the next owner. And I never, like, who thinks that way? Who's like, yeah, I'd love to make you, or I'd like to participate in you being a better person for your next partner, right? That's like everyone's nightmare generally. It's like, oh, now they are good. But to be able to do that intentionally and be like, yeah, like I really want love for you. And I think what it also did is just, it really closed it with grace. It sanctified that word sacred. There was such a sacred act. It was so, I mean, I did a lot of the sacraments. None of them felt like that. And, a lot of the language I use now about relationship is the restoration of what is sacred for ourselves. Because imagine if we treat ourselves as sacred. Then we bring that to the relationship. We treat our partner as sacred. Then we're going to look at our defensiveness and their wounds with more care and concern. And, I'll often say, like, can you lay that at the altar of relationship? Because that's ultimately what we're doing is laying down our most vulnerable parts, the things we're most ashamed of. That's where they get loved, is in relationship to other and through self-love and restoring, what is sacred in our relationship to ourselves.
I got nothing.
But you can do a closing ceremony on your own. That was a question I got a lot after, because, sometimes it's not safe to do a closing ceremony with someone. It's opening up another can of worms. Maybe they're toxic. But you can actually just set up 2 chairs, and you can do that act and switch chairs to answer the question for the other person. and it's just as potent, just as powerful.
It's a beautiful closure, clearing, release, because I think that's a lot of times things aren't cleared, things aren't completely closed, and you can't really truly invite anything else in until you've let go. That's the constant release and invite. The one consistent in this world is like, in order to achieve something else or to gain, we have to sacrifice, we have to let go. So such a beautiful practice. I don't know if I have the capacity. Hearing that, but like many people are like, wow, I don't know if I could ever do that. But
You don't till you do it.
like everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because it's also not conventional at all. Like, no one does that generally, until we start to see the actual value in it. Because what occurred after is there was just such respect for one another. There were still boundaries around communication, and we did have to clear things that we were maybe both angry or resentful about. But it really set this baseline of admiration. But I hear you. It was very confronting, and the idea of doing it again, if I had to, it would not really be optional because of the level of repair, just the level of love that existed in that exchange. But I know lots of people who, after I talked about it, did a podcast on it, I put it in my breakup course. Lots of people have written me being like, we did that, or I suggested that, and the person said yes, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences. So, it is available to people. And as I said, you don't have to do it with them. You can do it by yourself. And it's still powerful.
Just like this episode, I want to say again, fuck yes, Mark Groves. Oh, man. To get round 2 with you, to give us the space. I know how busy you are and how much you have on your plate, but to come back for round 2 and have these conversations, this means the world to me. Grateful for your time, grateful for your friendship and connection, and how you've been guiding me in a way for many years now. So much inspiration, pointing out blind spots with just your words on certain things that I thought I knew that I really didn't know when it comes to relationships. So really appreciate you, brother.
Thanks for having me back on. I mean, in a week, I made it back. And, to be able to have these conversations means a lot. And I'm grateful to be able to get to know you both personally now.
Yeah, man. Thank you for 2 weeks of reading my mail relationally, but just making a way that's practical for people to love themselves and have that love translate into wherever they go and whatever relationships they're in. I'm benefiting from it. Everyone that's listening to this is benefiting from it. So thank you for your time, man.
Yeah, and thanks to both of you for the work you do and on such large platforms with what is perceivably probably a lot of risk till it's not, till it's actually like so inspirational. So I appreciate you both that you stand in this and fight for these words and these conversations.
Yeah, it feels more like freedom these days than anything.
Right?
Where can, in case our listeners didn't hear the first episode, where can everybody track you down and find you?
You can find me on markgroves.com, Create the Love on, most social channels. I haven't really gotten too TikTok-y, but
It's hard.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I heard there's more dead people on Facebook than alive, so I'm not sure if I'll stay there either, but it's getting to be a pretty old platform. But yeah, you can find me. CreateTheLove.com is where all my courses are. And yeah, just fire me a DM if you need anything.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Yep.
Peace.